right, wonderful. Welcome, delegates. Thank you for coming to this conversation. We're honored to have a very special guest joining us here today. I'm the president of HPAIR, Zil Patel, and I'm joined by Mr. Ajay Piramal, who serves as the chairman of the Piramal Group, as you all know from the biography we sent out earlier, which is India's leading business conglomerate, and it employs over 10,000 people in 30 different countries. But beyond that, Mr. Piramal also serves as the non-executive director at Tata Sons, and he's also on HBS's Board of Dean's Advisors, so that he comes close to us at Harvard as well. And so, Ajay, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Wonderful. So for this conversation, we'll jump into three different directions. First is your early career, and then it's your business acumen. And then finally, we'll close off with a conversation about India and philanthropy. And so the very first thing that all of the delegates here really wanted to understand was sort of in the early days before Piramal Group became what it is today, why did you choose to work for your father's textile company right after graduation and after your MBA? What was that decision factor like?
So in a family managed and owned business, and especially during the 70s, it was quite, it was just the done thing that you would go and join your father's business. And particularly, I knew the environment in my family with my father was that he gave a lot of empowerment to young people. So my brothers before me, I could see that, as well as that there was the spirit of entrepreneurship, the spirit of growth. So why go somewhere else when you have it in your own backyard? So that was the thinking that was there. Frankly, I can tell you, when you are in a business like ours, and during as I said, in those days, I mean, I started going to my textile mills from the age of 14, 15, just in the holidays, to see how the business my father would do, or just take a look at the manufacturing. So there was no responsibility, but it was just part of the way we grew up.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. I think the culture has certainly changed now, but that's fascinating to hear that was the case. And so when you first initially took it on and were leading the textile business, India's environment at that time was not that conducive to most entrepreneurs and startups, especially when you were trying to scale the group. So what challenges did you face in the early days that you think would be very interesting to share?
So in those days, it was actually a very controlled environment. And frankly, the textile industry was one of the most controlled industries, because, you have to realize that the whole basic freedom, the cause of freedom in India was actually, if you remember, Mahatma Gandhi had the charkha, the spinning wheel, because he felt that that's how you created employment in the villages, and people needed to boycott mills and actually work at the home. And therefore, in a textile mill, even to increase a single loom which produced cloth, you were not allowed to do so. And there was a lot of permissions. So that was the environment. But in my particular case, there were even more, because my father, who was the chairman of the group, passed away very suddenly when I was just 24. And my elder brother, who took over as the chairman, passed away also just about 5 years later. So we had two tragedies. At the same time, there was an industry-wide strike, and so the workers struck work for about 18 months. So we had these challenges. So mine was a particularly different growth than what most people would have.
Wow. Okay. That's very fascinating. So thank you for sharing that. And so when your close relatives and family members passed away, and you realized that this was going to be your empire and you would have to grow it and scale it afterwards from there, how did you know immediately which different industries that were adjacent to expand into next? So from textiles, how did you know where you wanted to move after and make that business decision?
So frankly, I didn't know.
Okay.
And we did move from textiles, we went into pharmaceuticals. And now textiles and pharmaceuticals are as different as chalk and cheeses. There is no comparison, and no consultant and no business school grad would tell you that you should have gone into pharmaceuticals when actually we were in textiles. but there was an opportunity available for acquiring a pharmaceutical business. It was a small multinational in India. They wanted to exit out of India. And I thought that that was a good area to go in. It was a more sunrise industry. And therefore, that's how we bid for it. Fortunately, we got it. And that's then history.
Right. And this was Nicholas Labs, right?
Correct.
Right. Okay. And so when you expanded into Nicholas Labs and we're taking over that, one of the things that all of our delegates, especially at Harvard Business School, wanted to ask was, whenever you acquire a company, there's always initial challenges with cultural integration and bringing the two groups together. So how did you come to overcome this? Because it seems like you've mastered this with so many different acquisitions coming in.
Yeah, so it was a big challenge. So first of all, you must just appreciate, and people don't appreciate it as much today because times were different. As I said, when we did acquire it, it was the 80s. At that time, when you had a textile mill, it was a very traditional mill, traditional culture of management. If you were the owner and you actually called all the shots. And here was a multinational where people were more professional and were used to say, it was a different style of working. So we had a bit of challenge, but I think one of the things that I have always found is that you have to be open to understand what is the best of all people. As I say, we have to understand the best that the family managed business brings and what the best of the professional management, and take that out. So if one has confidence in oneself that you're doing, you don't need to assert yourself when you're open to different styles of management. That's what we did. So we incorporated what was good in Nicholas Labs compared to what was also good in our own business, and then actually grew that. So when we saw Nicholas was a pretty, let's say, a very somnolent company, nothing much was happening. We started investing in it. We grew it by investing in world-class capacity, in getting high-quality talent, and increasing our investments. People realized that this was a good place to be in. And in fact, we had problems in the beginning. Let me say that it was not easy, but I think we could manage it.
Wonderful. Okay, that's very useful to know. And we also had Mr. N.R. Narayanamurthy come speak at this conference. And in the past, we've had other leaders from India as well. And one thing they've emphasized in general is the importance of having a fantastic board as part of the company that's able to funnel in new ideas. And so what I wanted to ask you is, how do you think about who to add to your board, what skill sets they have, and curating the entire culture of the board in general so that the company can grow?
So I think we've also been fortunate to have some of the finest board members on us. So here is what we look for in board members. I look for board members who, first of all, have had a successful career, and not only a successful career, but a value-based successful career. They may have been, so I think that's where the culture, when you talk about, we have people who, in our own group, we have values, and we want to have people who align with those values, who think long term. Also, board members who will have the courage to tell you you're wrong. You don't need board members who always agree with you, but who are willing to actually tell you that this is not right. So for that, what you need is board members who really don't need your board. They are the people who should be in demand. They are the people who, there are many people wanting to ask them. So those are the type of people you need to attract. So as I said, people who've had a successful career, people who have a value-based career, which is very important, and who don't need you. And then, of course, you need various skills. So we had people who were like the founders of banks in us. Mr. Vargul has been the founder of the ICICI Bank. He was the senior most banker. Even then, he continues to be that. We had, you spoke about Mr. Tata. So we had the vice chairman of Tata, of TCS, Mr. Ramadura. He's still on our board. We had somebody, Mr. Dadi said, who was the Unilever a board. So he brought in, so some people bring in expertise in technology, others in finance, others in marketing. So that's how we would spread our board.
Wonderful. Okay. Wow. That's very fantastic to learn. And then the other question that we were very curious about, in Piramal Group in particular, you've now expanded into financial services, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, real estate, etc. And so what we wanted to understand was which of these new transitions was the hardest one, if you had to pick in particular, like which specific industry and why?
It's very difficult to say what is the hardest because, every industry is hard at some time or the other. You have to face challenges. To say that one industry is harder than the other is not correct. So let's take the example of the real estate. In the real estate, after we took over, it was doing well, but at certain times, there were lots of things in the environment which changed. So new regulations came in. And I don't want to go into specific regulations in India, but there were 4 or 5 really which you would have never expected to come in. That was one that brought in the challenges that the industry had to face. Or look at the financial services business. Again, whether it was the demonetization that took place in India, whether it was the whole crisis because of a failure of certain big institutions that took place, or the COVID, these have been challenging times. So each industry goes through what is difficult times, but frankly, I have not known in my career any industry which has had a straight, only one-way graph which just keeps rising. There will be ups and downs, and that's how business is.
Right, absolutely, yeah. And so now to expand on to more about India's business climate in general and the growth of it there, I think most people around the world right now are looking at India with a very keen eye, especially when it comes to technology, and are seeing the talent grow there and the opportunities grow there. But you also think about startups and new businesses coming in India all the time. And so what I wanted to ask was, what are some of the biggest obstacles that you think still exist for young startups in India that are trying to grow and become bigger? And how do you see that changing?
So first of all, before coming to obstacles, I think we must look at what has been the success. The startup culture in India has really done well. I mean, I'm surprised to read, but there are about 100 unicorns in India itself, which were, and every year we are creating more and more unicorns. There were 10 created in 19, 13 in 20, and in a month in 2019, in 2021, there have been 3. So every day you're seeing new unicorns. So that's all the startup culture. These are people who not had a history of a family business. They've had hardly any capital, but it's just technology and ideas. So I think, to me, rather than looking at challenges, I think there are many opportunities that they are there. And many areas of wealth creation are there today in India than what were they ever before. Even in the startup culture, they have now changed the rules to make it better and more seamless. And in fact, they are open to also listen to more suggestions on that.
Right. And no, I'm sure that's definitely the case there too. And in particular, we've observed a boom in India's tech sector, in IT and startups there in particular. But what we've also seen is when you observe global tech entirely, it's been growing as well as an industry all throughout the world. And a statistic that's often raised is, why is India not able to capture more of the global tech market, given that it has so much of a large contribution in terms of talent, production, and even innovation? Do you think that it's capturing a smaller amount and it could capture more, or what do you see the direction of that?
So I'm actually optimist, and I can see that there's more and more being captured. The value that is being created with technology is significant. First of all, the traditional technology companies like the TCSs of the world are now becoming larger. If I look at their profitability, and their growth is better than most of the other companies, and it's not very far away that you will see them starting to lead globally. But even the tech startups, there are a lot, and people are saying that I think there are estimates that there'll be huge amounts of value that will be created in startups over time. So They, as you said, the biggest strength that India still has its talent. I can tell you, we have a business in the US, and we were employing data scientists there, and we also hired data scientists in India. The cost of the data scientists in India was about one third to one fourth of what it was in the US, and the quality of output was as good. So
Right.
this is the big advantage I think India has. And now in a world like, and I think the whole pandemic has also shown that you don't need to be physically present, because at one time there was a big stress that how will so many, people from India say work, get the H-1B visas and all in the US. And that's no longer such a challenge. Actually, you can work from anywhere, anytime. So that's the good news.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. That conflict is still there. Even for me, as someone who's an immigrant into the country, the H-1B visa is still an obstacle. And so you also pointed out the data scientists, and that's a great segue to the next thing we wanted to investigate was Piramal Group has a bunch of businesses and a bunch of hospitals and does business in healthcare analytics and healthcare data. And I wanted to ask what you see as the future of using that healthcare data to help support doctors and support physicians in their practices. What do you see are the different use cases there?
So I think let's take the case. I mean, I think that there's huge, unfortunately, the healthcare industry till now was not really using data. I
Right.
mean, I know that every time, even now, if you go to a doctor, they would still take your history, and they would still not have all the data that you have of all the medication taken. So can you create healthcare records? And now we're doing that on a national level with the government, and trying to see how we can create a platform which can be used across the country. And this is not for profit, but this is what I think the challenge is, so that when the history is available to you, the doctor seeing you knows exactly how to treat you, what to be treated. So I think data, again, healthcare has been a industry which has been, I would say, behind in that, but it's slowly catching up.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
And I find that you can use technology even, I mean, in remote places. So, for instance, in India, we had done an experiment in a tribal area where there was no access to, there was the infrastructure just didn't allow, hospitals or doctors would not come there. But then how do you treat patients there? And we realized that with just remote data and by over using technology over the net, you could actually, they could fairly assess what the diagnosis was and recommend a treatment. And it has had significant benefit, whether it's in infant mortality, maternal mortality. So it's possible to do.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely, and we've read about this, which is why it's so fascinating. In market failure situations like rural places in India and situations like that, it's wonderful to see the work that Piramal Group is doing there. And what I wanted to understand further was when it comes to leveraging that healthcare data in a for-profit model or in different systems like that. Certainly, it's being used for clinicians and for diagnosis and things like that. But are there any technologies that you think are not being dreamt about or not being done yet where that data could be extremely useful in the long run?
So there is so much of still the human biology that has to be understood, that the data can actually be used anywhere. And I'm seeing it globally as well. A lot of data is now used on R&D, and that's why you find that actually the success of new drugs the number of drugs that go into trial and then which are actually approved by the FDA has gone up, only because of the use of data and the analytics. And especially that's why you also find that the newer biotech or the smaller companies are actually doing much better in terms of drug discovery. So it is in any and every field, actually, it's used.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. And so now that we're on this sort of flavor of picking your brain about predicting the future, what I wanted to ask is, given your, of course, successful career, I think many of our delegates want to get a sense of what technologies in general that you think are going to have an important positive impact in the future that most people are not thinking about. And when we asked Mr. Murthy this and other speakers this, they said AI and they said other things, but I'm curious for you personally, what do you think is a technology that most people are not thinking about that will have an outsized impact on the future?
So I don't know what technology, because a lot of people are thinking, at least to my knowledge, there are lots of new thoughts going on, and every day there's a new thought. I think what's really important now, what I see in the really the world and in the marketplace, is to actually not only earlier on when we started business, used to understand what the customer wanted. But I
Right.
think the next stage, which is already what you find successful companies doing, is to anticipate what a customer will need in the future. So really understanding the customer more deeply is, I think, the first and the most important thing that we need to do. And that's how new businesses, new industries have come. So whether you see the success of a lot of the startups today, they are the ones who've understood consumers, and there are new applications that are found on a daily basis that customers want, or you can create that need in the future. I think, to me, if I was an entrepreneur, and that's what you have to do, to understand what the future of the customer will be. But obviously, as far as India is concerned, there's still a lot of scope which is available, whether it is in the whole renewable energy space. We are talking about the carbon footprint, and I can see definitely that how can we reduce the carbon footprint, and a lot of work, a lot of talk is there, but I think there will be huge energy. The healthcare space, as you talked about, is another space. Again, India, how do you make affordable but reliable healthcare is what's important. It's difficult. I see that the cost of diagnosis, the cost of treatment is very high today. In a country which, like India, you need to lower the cost so that it can be spread across. We've done it in the formulations and the API manufacturing. Now, how can you do it in the diagnosis is another big area, and then treatment as well. I think that's there. Retail, still the India, the consumer story is still very,
Right.
it's still, there's a lot of opportunities. I see that the digital economy every day, as I said, if we can understand the power of data, the power of digital is very good. The railroads that the India has created actually is quite amazing. I mean, I'll just give you an instance. During the pandemic, the government of India could distribute to 800 million people free food
Wow.
without a hitch, and could also give, with the press of a click, billions of rupees in the hands of the poor people with a click. I don't think anywhere in the world has this happened. So I think we need to understand the power that the digital railroads are there, and a lot of investment is still going on in improvisation. So these are areas, if you were to look at, India would actually prosper.
Yeah, and definitely benefit from. So thank you for sharing. So shifting gears a bit in business and in India more broadly, one of the topics we wanted to cover was also private equity, since of course the Piramal Group is excellent and experienced in that, and has perspective. So private equity generally gets a bad rep because most people tend to believe that the time horizons for these firms tend to be too short. And so they're incentivized to optimize for things really quickly. And that has downstream effects for technology and for workers and things like that. But in the long run, private equity can certainly be used as a force for good, especially social good. And so what I wanted to ask was, what is your perspective on private equity and its role in the marketplace broadly?
So I don't think it's fair to label private equity as bad or good. It depends on each private equity. But yes, I think in a country like India, which is growth, and a lot more capital has to come in, and we are starved of capital. Actually, India is capital deficient, and if you need to bring the economy to be a 5 trillion economy from the 2.5 it is today in the next few years, you need capital. So I think private equity does play a role in it. Besides that, I think private equity forces you to become more and more competitive. So that in itself is it's a good way of, and to use best practices globally, they bring it into your company. And if your company has good practices, they take it elsewhere. So I think overall, I would say that they are playing a positive role. and India needs them. And the social good is if you believe that if economic progress takes place, social good follows, which is what we've seen, that when the economy grows, when the GDP grows, that those funds do come back in the economy. So it can be this thing of growth as well.
Right. And so it depends on each case, which is definitely true. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about your other work, which we find quite fascinating, in philanthropy. And so, of course, you're involved with the Piramal Foundation, which you run and spend significant amounts of your time in, and it focuses on health, education, and safe drinking water and meals for impoverished people. And so what we wanted to understand was, a general problem that's true in philanthropy is when you have cash to invest in problems and you can accelerate the rate of progress in those problems, how do you pick which problem to solve and which problem to work on? And so what I wanted to understand was your personal criteria in choosing where to invest your foundation's resources.
So our foundation, first of all, is a little different because we believe rather than granting funds to in different areas, we want to do it ourselves. Right. So we have actually 4,500 people on a full-time basis working in our foundation, which are doing. So which are the areas? We selected these 3 areas you talked about, whether it's education, health, clean drinking water. Now, all these were because where you feel you have a passion for. Actually, that's what is important. And then you have to get people who are passionate in that area to come and join you. So we had education as always, because we as a family believe that education is important. That's what distinguishes in a world today between whether you're successful or not. And why should it be that some people are deprived of it only because the circumstances were not there? So that was the thinking for education. Health, we have been a pharmaceutical company, and we believe in health and how good health can change things. So that's how we came into health. Clean drinking water, again in India, we found that a lot of actually health problems were there because of absence of clean water. So these are the areas. So as far as I said, the foundation for me depends on really what you have passion for, because to do this is a challenging thing. It's not an easy thing to do. So you have to have passion, as you have to actually have in business too. So that's how we chose these areas. We have a few principles which we follow as far as the foundation is. First of all, we believe that in India, the problems are large and they've been going on for many decades. And therefore, they are unique to India. They are not the same as you would have in the US, problems and solutions. So you need a lot of innovation. And innovation, that's where foundations and people like us who are willing to risk capital, because as you know, any innovation is fraught with risk. If you take 10 opportunities, 10 ways of solving the problem, maybe 4 or 5 may succeed. And that's why we believe you should have risk capital. That's what we provide. So innovation is one. Second, we think that in India, with a population of 1.3 billion people, whatever solution you do for innovation, you have to work on scale. Right. If you were to do it for 5,000 people, 10,000 doesn't make a difference. And even so, therefore, we work on scale. The only way to work on scale is to have a partnership. And you have to have a partnership with government. So that's our third thing, that we need to partner with government. Even the largest foundations in the world, whether it's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations of whatever you want, Rockefeller, Ford, they cannot do it unless it can make a big difference, unless you partner with government. So that's our third premise. And the fourth, as I said, most important is that you need people with passion. And if they are going to work for it as a job, then that's not the right person. So when you have all this, then you can try and do something.
Wow. Okay. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. And it's actually quite timely that you mentioned the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because 3 hours ago, we had their CEO, Mark Sussman, come speak at this conference. And one of the questions that he raised, which I'd love to ask you too, is in philanthropy, some of the hardest things is measuring progress. So even when you pick a problem and you invest your resources, and in your case, the 4,000 plus employees that are working on it, how do you actually know if you're making a significant impact and if in the long run this is going to stay, or it's just a short-term solution and once you leave, it's not going to be there?
So that's a good question. And what we do is that we do measure impact. So let me give you the case. I mean, since you talked about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I can say this. The Prime Minister in India about 4 years ago had identified 112 districts which were the most backward in the country in terms of many social indicators. And in 25 of these districts, we were responsible for education and health. Right. They said that your foundation should work on education and health. And actually, a comparative study was done, and you'll be happy to know that it was from the Harvard's Business School's Institute of Comparative Studies, as well as the Niti Aayog, which is the organization which does India, and iGate, sponsored by the Bill Gates Foundation, a organization which measures impact. And I'm happy to say that out of the 5 most improved districts in education, out of the 112, 4 of them were where we had worked.
Oh, wow.
And in health also, out of the 10 most improved districts, we were in 3 of them. So, and this is a measurement which is done by independent people. So we always believe that measurement has to be done, impact studies have to be done. And if it is not doing impact, then we have to see whether we can change it. And if not, then we will drop a project. So it's not every time you succeed, but in the big projects, we've always, till now, have managed to make it change.
Right. So what's your secret formula, Ajay? What's the secret sauce that you're doing?
I told you, the same 4 principles, whether it is innovation, scale, partnership, and passion.
Right. No. Of course. No, thank you for sharing that.
Measurement. At the end of the day, you have to measure.
Yes, absolutely.
You have to be patient. That's the other thing. You can't measure in the first 3-4 years. It may take 5 years for you to get. But if you can get a sense on the ground that it's doing well, then we have to wait for the results, because the social indicators are not like a profit that comes in overnight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So before we jump into our audience Q&A questions, because I see that many of the students from Harvard have plenty of questions they want to ask you, I want to ask one final question, which is, if you think about the future of India when it comes to market failures, so not solutions where there's businesses that are working on them, but philanthropic organizations, what is one problem that you think is not having enough foundations or charities working on that, and why is the reason for it?
I don't like to give you one problem. In India, there are lots of problems. One can look, that's why I say that wherever there is a passion, you will find that there are issues, whether it's malnutrition, whether it is, so whether it is just hold the climate, environment, there's so many issues. So to do one, I would not say so.
Okay, no, very fair. No, appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so jumping into our audience Q&A question, our first question we have is from Rahul Indira, who's a student at Harvard Business School. And the question that he asked was, when it comes to recruiting and hiring talent, whether it's for the Piramal Foundation or the Piramal Group itself, what do you think are some of the most important traits that you look for when hiring top quality talent?
So, of course, I'm assuming the education and all that, that's a given. But I think for us, it's very important that is there a alignment with the values that we hold dear to us and the values of an individual. So the values that we have as a company are actually values that you can practice in life. So it's like knowledge, it's action. So when we mean knowledge, we mean that do you have innovation? Do you have expertise? In action, whether you have integrity and entrepreneurship? The third value is care. So do you believe in do you have humility? you have a trusteeship angle, and then impact. So these are some of the values, and we've then identified certain success factors that we call our success factors. And then that's how we actually assess the candidates to see whether there's an alignment with that or not. So for us, values is the most important. Of course, I'm assuming that the education and all is taken care of. And for people, and for us, references is the other very critical thing too. So
Right.
references with people whom you have directly worked, and deep references is what makes a difference. So values and reference.
Absolutely. Okay. So then the next question comes from Jane Lee, who asked about structure in an organization. And she says, as your perspective as chairman of Piramal Group, how do you think about structuring the organization, whether it's making teams or even broadly in your immediate cabinet of your C-suites and your board and the people that report directly to you, especially when you were scaling Piramal Group, how did you think about structure?
So I think a structure, what I think today and what we were doing earlier is very different. So
Right.
for instance, today what we find is that we are really using the agile method of working, where there are teams and there is no hierarchy, and these teams just meet, they are quick teams, they solve an issue. It's not always the best solution, but it keeps improvising over time. The teams disbanded when the solution is got reassembled into another team. So that's the thing. But yes, the way we look at structure is the way we've always believed that it's the younger people, you have to give them responsibility more than what they can expect at their age. And then trust them, allow them to function, allow them sometimes to make mistakes as well, and grow into the organization. So yes, we have a formal structure of CEOs and people below, but I see that this is actually now getting a little blurred. It's not that you have to meet the CEO and then go to the next level of person through the CEO. These lines are now getting more and more broken up. So it's a
No,
very evolving and changing, I could say, structure.
no, agreed. And that makes a lot of sense. And so the next follow-up question to that is from Evan Chin, who is a recent graduate out of IIT. And he asked this question, the trend in the labor market tends to be that many students are coming into college and university thinking they want to practice medicine or be in certain other fields, say legal, etc. And then they, in India especially, are converging to IT. So after they graduate, they'll end up getting IT degrees and working in those spaces. And he asked, is this a good thing for the long term of India, or do you think this potentially means there's too much progress in one space and not enough in other spaces?
So it's not necessarily that, sometimes you may feel that the flavor of the moment is IT, but it's not necessary. I mean, when you look at the number of people who are applying for seats in the MBBS program, there are actually as many. There are many more people applying than there are seats available, as they are in IT. And in fact, at one time there was excess of engineers. So these are, if I may say, fashions at that moment. But I think, fortunately for India, there's enough of young people. And so I don't see that as a major issue. We still have a shortage of number of doctors in the country. That's because the program is difficult. To be a doctor is not easy.
Right.
It's probably the most difficult. So that's how it is.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. The next question we have is from Shubhi Verma, who's from Gujarat. And she asked the question, if you were to bring yourself back to when you were 21 or 22 in your early days, what is it that you would work on right now and why?
So, as I said, today is a great time to do so many more things than what we could do in the past. As I said, to me, really understanding what the future of the customer thinking is, if one can crack that, then you don't need capital as much. Then it's the idea, it's the innovation. And I think then there will be enough capital to back it. These are not capital intensive. Also, the good news is that as far as data is concerned, the cost of data is coming down, and the speed and the capacity of all the computing has become so high with the cloud there and all. There are huge advantages. So one could look at that. But frankly, in an economy like India, which will be actually the fastest growing economy in the next 5 years, according to IMF, there are opportunities in every space. So you have to just find the right space.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you for sharing that. And now we have Mrs. Daphne Zhang, who's asking this question. What do you think the woman can change in terms of innovation and the climate for women in leading companies in India? Is there a need for greater diversity of women at the top in large Indian organizations?
So there is a need for diversity. I would say that for women at the top, there's not enough yet. And I think it's just sure when women, I mean, when people realize that women can actually contribute better than men and treat them in the same way as you would interview a man, I think it would be definitely there. But we need to do more. We'll have to take some more specific steps to do that.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, Ajay, for sharing that. And so the last two audience Q&A questions that I have for you, the first one follows up on a conversation we had with Patrick Collison, who is the CEO of Stripe, one of America's fastest growing startups. And he raised the question of how tough it is to get angel investors who are big CEOs and chairmen like yourself, and how to get in touch with them, because often it goes through networks and referrals if you're looking for a seed investment from one of these individuals. And so the question that follows up from the audience is, what is the preferred method if someone was trying to raise a seed round and wanted to contact you to get in touch for that seed or Series A for their startup?
So we actually, for me, it's different. But let me say that now people are realizing, I think over time, people are realizing that they have to be open to get new ideas. Because from nowhere, you're seeing all these unicorns coming up. These were ideas, and I'm sure they must have been rejected by many people, and then they've become what they have. So we have actually got a fund which we've started. The real reason for that fund is to keep in touch with what's happening in the world. You know, you'll see 20 ideas, you may seed only one of them, but at least you get ideas. So I can only say that it's just keep worth trying as much as as many as you can. There's no harm in doing that. That's the only way it will happen, because it's an idea. Somebody has to appreciate it. That's how it will be. And I think we are going to increase our investment in this. And we're also going to start another small group of people who will just look at certain ideas. And
oh, excellent. Okay, well, that's...
You have to keep in mind that we learn as much, even if the idea doesn't, we may not invest in it, we learn as much probably than what even the person who had the idea has. So it's a two-way street.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. So I guess that's great advice for whoever asked this question for how to get in touch with Ajay. His fund is probably the most direct route to go through. Wonderful. All right. And so the last few sets of questions I have, one is just a quick one from Joshua Santos, who's contacting you from Australia. And he says, Ajay, when you were traveling throughout your business career, and this is sort of off a tangent, so this is interesting, what was the place that you traveled that you found most delightful, and why?
No. So travel for work or travel for a vacation or a holiday? So
let's hear both. Both.
No. So for work, I've traveled a lot more. I have to say in the West than it was in the East, and it would of course be the US. It would be all of Europe, the UK, and the usual places, the usual suspects. Because where would we travel? So when it was a pharmaceutical, where the pharmaceutical industry was located to meet them. When it was in other businesses, the US, so it is all over. Nothing, I'm sorry, I can't give you anything more exciting. No traveling to the Amazon and all that stuff.
What about for your personal vacations or with your family?
So yeah, over time now, so we travel, okay. So the easiest to go is London, but we travel to different places in Europe, actually all over.
Okay. Now that makes sense. Wonderful. All right, thank you. And so the final question that I wanted to ask you to kick off this session was just, if you were to catalog all of the different universities that you've had the chance and the opportunity to speak at, which university do you think is one that has a very high density of talent, but is often not discussed about, and why?
That's not a fair question to ask because I've been the president of an IIT for 5-6 years. Now president of a design university, which was started from scratch. As you said, I've been on the board, or I am on the board of Harvard, and also it's not a fair question to ask. Let me say that each one has its own strengths and its own attraction from, at least for me to be interested for so long in them.
Okay, wonderful. And I know I said that was the last question, but we just had one more question come in from Harvard professor Josh Lerner, which I would love to ask you. This question is asking about the future of the relationship between India and China when it comes to business. What do you perceive is in the long term going to happen, given the tensions right now and the climate between the two? Do you think it's going to be possible for Indian entrepreneurs to have outsized impact in growing their business in China, and vice versa for Chinese entrepreneurs to come and grow their business in India?
So I can't speak for the very long term because I think it's not only the issues that India has with China, but the whole geopolitical situation around China. When you read about the technology that is there, and you read about, China is becoming more and more powerful. It depends on what the US will do with it. It'll depend on what the other leading European countries will do with it. And India, of course, has its own challenges, but I think this is the overall, we'll have to understand what happens in the rest of the world for India to take a call. So yes, we've had tensions in India and China, particularly now in the recent last, say, 1.5, 2 years. But that has meant that some trade still continues between the two countries. Some restrictions on investments are coming in, but I'm seeing that actually across the US, and I'm seeing that in China itself. So it's a fluid situation. So I'm sorry, I can't say what will happen for long term. But yes, in the next few years, I see that the investments between the two countries will be lesser than what they were in the past.
Wonderful. Okay, well, with that, I'd love to wrap up this session. And first of all, just say thank you so much, Ajay, for taking the time to come speak with us at Harvard. We really appreciated it. If this was a normal in-person year, we would have a big round of applause for you in HBS and in the theater. But for now, I guess a virtual round of applause will have to do. But thank you, Ajay.
Thank you, Zeel. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.